Welcome, Built Right listeners. We have a great guest today, Amber Prause, digital product owner and formerly full stack conversation designer at Gordon Food Services. And she manages 10 of their different chatbots across the organization. And today we're going to get into how the world of conversation design and conversational interfaces like chatbots have changed with the recent surge of Gen AI, introduction of tools like ChatGPT, and the million other large language models that are out there. And just for context, Gordon Food Services is the largest privately held food service distributor in North America, delivering the products to over 100,000 customers, including independent restaurants, long-term care facilities, hospitals, schools, colleges, regional and national chain restaurants. Amber, you can tell I went through the About Us page here, but you've probably eaten their food at some point in time. And they even have grocery stores, and they've been around for 125 years. So a massive organization. But welcome to the show, Amber.
Yeah, Matt, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this. And foundationally, conversational design is one of those domains that's really changing and getting impacted with everything going on. So you have this proliferation of Gen AI, tools like ChatGPT, and it's a very clear inflection point of before Gen AI and after Gen AI. And it's impacting every domain, every industry out there. But I think a good starting point for the listeners, give us some context for what even is conversational design. Let's start there.
Yeah, that's a good question and hard to pinpoint because I feel like even before the shift into this Gen AI, the industry was still getting their bearings on exactly what it means to be a conversation designer.
Yeah.
But in my perspective and from my experience as a full stack conversation designer, is we are training NLUs to understand human language basically and how we would speak in a normal conversation. And we're in charge of when you're typing with a chat bot or anything like that, it sounds as natural as possible, even though it's not a human on the other side.
And you mentioned NLUs. What does that stand for?
Yeah, so that's the natural language understanding.
Understanding. Okay. Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
It's cool. So we build software solutions at Hatchworks, and the user experience is a big part of what we do in building software. And a lot of times people think traditionally of, okay, how I'm interacting with a software product, but user experience UX is a huge part of conversational design, I would guess as well.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. It goes hand in hand there.
Yeah, designing the experience. So we've hit this inflection point. ChatGPT came out, and there's LLMs prior to that. It's not like some new amazing thing that just popped out of nowhere, and people have been using those. But there was almost this, and correct me if I'm wrong, pre-ChatGPT, a lot of the conversational design was very deterministic in terms of you really had to design out every aspect of the flow, every edge case, because you had to define it.
Mhm.
Whereas LLMs, now those have been introduced and they can do their own thing in a non-deterministic way. So I talk about how that has evolved. Like previously, everything that kind of went into designing a conversation flow, like were you actually going in and having to determine every edge case? I'm imagining like this giant Miro board or whiteboard solution that has this intense workflow of all the different things that could happen.
Yeah, you're not far off there. I actually am a fan of whiteboards. I would whiteboard a lot of things, but yeah,
Yeah.
pre this Gen AI, there would be, so we approached it as identifying like main components of why somebody might use this chatbot. And it was always
Mm,
important to know, obviously, like where is your chatbot, who's going to be using it, just knowing
yeah.
your user. And from that, we were able to bucket these reasons we think somebody would use this chatbot and build around that. But always knowing that we're building for 80% of the questions, we know we're not going to be able to answer 100% of it. With that approach, and also customer service logs. I come from customer
Mm,
service background. I
Yeah.
actually was on the customer service team here at Gordon Food Service. So having that knowledge of why are our customers calling in, right? What can we automate for that? That's like the standard starting point. And yeah, just finding those common themes. And then, like you said, breaking down each of those themes into this working conversational flow that would get a user from point A to point B with the answer they needed. Very hand broken down and thought out. And then on the tech side of that, we're a Google company, so we use Dialogflow, and you are in there getting training phrases. So teaching the chatbot, if somebody says something like this, we're going to output this exact writing that I'm telling you to output.
Yeah.
And that's one of the main shifts we're seeing now with an LLM or Gen AI. We're telling the large language model, here's like your rule set. It could be different what it outputs every time. So
Yeah, and we've been talking a lot about this at Hatchworks. So it's something similar on the software development side, where our people are moving from the doers in essence to like the orchestrators. And what you just said there was really interesting. It's like that role of the conversation designer now is shifting from, okay, I'm going to literally define every response, and there's like this enormous tree of stuff that's happening, to you're now training the LLM in a sense on, okay, these are the type of questions that you want to feed in this response. That's really interesting. And you also mentioned some core principles too, in terms of who's the chatbot for, the purpose of it, what are they trying to get out of it? That doesn't go away, does it? With the evolution of Gen AI, I feel like that's still always going to be present. You got to answer those questions up front.
in my opinion, that's one of the most important things to have. You have to know your why. We don't just want to throw a chatbot anywhere and assume that's the answer to solve all the problems. So I would think, yes, we're still approaching it as there's a reason this chatbot is here. Just how we get to that end result is looking a little different.
Yeah, we're going to get into some of those fun examples, maybe scary examples where some of this has gone wrong in the past. So we're going to get there in a minute. Okay, so you have around 10 or so chatbots right now. I think this is a really interesting area too, because like we hit on the top of the show, Gordon Food Services is an enormous company. And I feel like the larger the enterprise, the more potential risk of using new technology. So how are y'all approaching this? 'Cause I'm sure you have internal chatbots, you have customer facing chatbots, they're doing different things. There's varying levels of risk where if something went wrong, it could be a bad outcome. But how are y'all approaching starting to dip your toes into the potential with generative AI, what it has to offer?
Yeah, I would say from my perspective here, we are definitely not ignoring the fact that this is big. This is changing the way how people like do their job, how we are servicing people. And we've definitely been experimenting internally with some Gen AI capabilities. We are moving ahead with caution on putting anything in front of the user, as you've been alluding to.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of cases where, yeah, it's great. Like maybe you were the first adopter of it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was orchestrated well and it had some detrimental endings. So I would say our approach is we're very in tune with what's going on with Gen AI, and we're testing it out on our people internally before we pull the plug and start putting it in front of our users.
Yeah, so that's an interesting approach. I think it makes a lot of sense too, especially when the main function of Gordon Food Service is food service, right? And the distribution of those things. So it's not like you're a AI company and a chatbot is your main product you're serving. But what I found interesting though, you said you're testing this internally first. So is that in terms of like internal chatbots within employees, or are those like certain types of customers? Like where are y'all starting to test there first?
Yeah, so I would say this is twofold. So the first thing that you said, correct. We're spinning up some internal chatbots. We actually have one in the works right now that's going to be servicing our sales representatives and just making their workflow easier, streamlining some things. But the other side of that is I feel like we've been empowered to use Gen AI in our workflow. So going back to as a conversation designer, where I would be scraping customer service logs and looking for training phrases, and every single way somebody might ask something, now I just go to the chat GPs or the bards or the Geminis, whatever they are now, and say, hey, I'm looking for training phrases for this, and it gives me that starting point. So weaving that into our workflows would be the other way that we're dipping our toes in.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. That's interesting. It's like a meta type of thing where the conversational designer is using it to improve the conversation design. But go deeper into that. So what areas are you using it in that way? Is it helping to define the flows? And you mentioned like the analytics side of it, and takes me back to the point you made earlier around the customer service logs. That's your input on how things are going, where you improve. So go deeper on how you're using that internally in your work process.
Yeah, so I would say some key touch points before Gen AI. We're manually like looking for all of those training phrases, like how we would train somebody to hit this specific intent. Another bucket of that would be actually writing out the flow, right? So I'm sketching on my whiteboard. I'm going to say this. User's going to say this. Chatbot's going to say this. Where now I prompt an LLM, hey, here's the use case. How might this conversation look? Now, I'm not saying like you just plug that in and there's your flow, right? But it's really driving that efficiency of, okay, I have a starting point now. Now I can really put my human touch on it and make it that conversational way. And then the other side that maybe people aren't thinking of is for building your user persona. A lot of that would be, there'd be a lot of time like researching and everything. We have our marketing team. We know who our user is, but let's really build a story around that for a chatbot use case. So that's been another way that I've used Gen AI differently as a conversation designer, where before it would be like really thinking through all of that, taking a bunch of time, but it's kickstarting me into really diving down into where I can make a difference.
That's interesting. And have you noticed any weird behaviors from things you've been testing or playing around with it? Whether it's in the actual ones you're looking to put into production or just internally?
I would say like training phrase wise, it obviously doesn't know who your user and customer is. So it can be broad. Nothing like too strange or out of the ordinary, I guess that sticks out, but that's
a good thing. Right?
Yeah, it is showing though, you need somebody with this type of knowledge on your team. It's not you plug it into the LLM and now it's good to go, right? There's so much nuance to your personal customer and you want to be personalized to that. So,
and you mentioned training phrases. Go deeper on that. What does that actually look like when you're training the LLM? Are you just giving it like 5 different phrases and it associates with this type of conversation or response, or how many does it take? What does this look like in terms of the scale and how you're training the LLM?
Yeah, good call. So before it was training an LLM, we would want to see 15 to 20 what we call training phrases, and really just like examples of how somebody would ask this question that would hit this intent, right? Now fast forward to when you are putting an LLM in front of your customer, it's more like that prompt engineering hat. So you're telling the LLM, this is what I need you to do. And then rather than training phrases, you're really just giving an example of what you want it to do. And you don't need 20 of those, right? Now we need 3. So
that's almost a shift from before and after. Before it was training on the key phrases, and now you're almost defining the persona, the purpose of the tool, the process it is to follow. So that's the change that's happened.
Yep,
Oh,
exactly.
okay, that's interesting.
Like in the same
Uh, yeah.
prompt, an LLM to answer one of your questions, like if you're using Chat
Mm.
GPT or something. We're doing that on the back end, and we're saying, hey, this is like your use case. Like one of our main ones here at Gordon Food Service is track my truck. So I
Yeah.
would say, this is your role. You're supposed, like, you need to track a truck for a customer, right? I want you to say it exactly like this or something like, it's really just like being able to, in simple terms, explain to this large language model what you need it to output. So it's more like you get to talk English, right, to it, and then
Mhm.
it's doing the outputting rather than you going in and specifically saying this will be the exact output.
Yeah, having to dictate it. But you mentioned tracking my truck. The LLM can't just magically figure that out. I'm assuming there's some component of integrating in with your systems or getting into this concept of like a RAG model architecture, which is just retrieval augmented generation, where you upload some files and it uses that as its source to pull from. But
Yep.
is that dynamic starting to play into it?
Yes, like I said, we haven't really changed any way our users interacting with it
Hmm.
in LLMs, but with these new chatbots, at least in the near future, maybe not the future, but I'm seeing that there's probably going to be a mix of, there's still going to be that need for intent based and knowing
Yeah.
exactly what the output is going to be, plugging in your APIs, things like that. But also maybe there's some use cases in there that can utilize Gen AI. So I think that's been the task as of late. There's been this new layer of thought process. Okay, here's what we want to solve. First question, can this or should this be solved with Gen AI? Yes
Hmm.
or no? Then if yes, this way, if no, this way.
Yeah, and for the listeners, that's how you need to be thinking about it. In one of our previous episodes with Jason Slachter, we went through this same example, right? It's like, how do you identify winning Gen AI use cases? And at the starting point, it's, was this even a good use case or purpose for Gen AI? I think a lot of people think of it as, oh, it's a search engine, but not really, right? And that's the core part too. It doesn't solve everything. There still is the need, to your point, of having it connected into your systems where it can get actual data.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes that process a lot easier in terms of how it can look at the data, retrieve it, um, decipher what the customer's wanting from it, right? So I think that's the key thing that folks need to understand is how do you identify the right use case and when to use it? Because it's a tool at the end of the day. Do I need a hammer or do I need a wrench or do I need some
Exactly.
other random a backhoe, right? You don't know.
Exactly. Yep.
So let's get into some examples. Like I've seen several in the press as of late. Any that come to mind that you've seen, whether it's chat bot related specific or just Gen AI in general, where either it's a fail or you've seen somebody do something really compelling and interesting with Gen AI.
That's a good question. Yeah, I think we discussed offline a couple of the chatbots maybe that we've seen take a stab at having Gen AI answer some things. I can't obviously remember the exact companies, but there was a car one I think I heard of where they ended up buying a car for $1 because the LLM behind it was doing the actual negotiating when it probably that's not the role
Yeah.
it was meant for. That one comes to mind. And then of course, I think the airline one has been the big buzz lately. Have
Oh,
what,
that's
what
funny. I haven't heard the, I'm like literally Googling as we talk.
I know I can't
And it
remember
just
the
came up on Hacker News. Oh, this is interesting. I hadn't heard this one yet. Uh, so it looks like it was like a Chevy or
yeah,
something. prankster tricks a GM chatbot into agreeing to sell him a $76,000 Chevy Tahoe for $1. Oh
Right.
my God. I've not heard of this one. That's
Yes.
interesting. But that's like the perfect example right there where that's the scale of one. But if something like that proliferates, like that's huge. And we're already seeing, I think, some court cases. And you mentioned the airline one where, and this was actually back in, I think, 2022. So maybe very early days of ChatGPT. And this
Yep.
was, just using traditional LLMs in advance of that. But something around the person interfacing with the chatbot was looking for like a bereavement credit for somebody traveling for a funeral. And the chatbot said, you can get the credit after booking versus in advance.
Mhm.
And that went against their policy. And the person took him to court and basically said, no, the chatbot is under your purview. And the airline was trying to make the case that they shouldn't be responsible for that because the chatbot is like its own entity. It's responsible for its own actions, and they lost, right? Which makes
Mhm.
sense, right? They said this is within your
100%.
purview of your company, right? You're
Uh-huh.
responsible for it. So
Like
there's
you don't have
already
to have that on your website,
Mhm.
right?
Exactly. So there's already legal precedents happening where you got to be very cautious, and these things can act autonomously. But they can go rogue as well. I was trying to find another one. I've also seen the ones where some of the chatbots are acting rude towards a customer
Oh yeah.
or using some profane language, which that was not part of the intent in what it was trained on, but you
Hopefully.
don't
Yeah.
always know where it's going to go. Exactly. Maybe it found something in a call log somewhere and pulled something from that.
Yeah.
Uh,
The other cool thing, like the cool part about that though, is that really you could dive in to be so personalized for your
mhm.
user. Like if we're thinking about this in a maybe positive way that you can
Yeah,
use
yeah,
it
yeah.
is if your preference is, Matt, that the chatbot does use this more not nice language or whatever. And my preference is that it's just like straight to the point, personalized.
Mhm.
Like you could have different chat experiences using the same chatbot. And I think that's cool.
That's very cool. And that's where it comes into connecting with the interactions like me as a consumer has had with the brand.
Hmm.
And we've all had that experience where you call in and you got to go through every answering of every question you feel like you've answered a million times versus the chatbot knowing who you are, your experience, what your preferences are, even stuff that the company didn't have to necessarily specifically develop and code in a way. It's just it's there and it's being leveraged by the LLM. I think that's the utopian side of it versus the
Mhm.
dystopian where it's
Right.
cussing you out. And another interesting, just saw this yesterday. So Meta has Llama. That's like their open source model. You think of ChatGPT with OpenAI. But they came out with something called Llama Guard. So it's an LLM based input output safeguard for human AI conversation. So there's some interesting new stuff coming there where you can almost add this wrapper around your LLM that's
Hmm.
acting as like a safeguard or a second check so
Starters. Yeah.
something doesn't go rogue and do something atypical of what you would want. There's a lot of interesting stuff. Have y'all played with anything related to that yet?
Not to my knowledge, not in my area. We haven't.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting. And that also just a good reminder. It's hard because this space is changing so much.
Yeah.
And
Every
you're
day.
always going to have the early adopters, but also sitting back and being able to soak it in and cut through the noise and figure out what's going to work right for you and let Gen AI play that role of it's opening these doors is why it's advancing so quickly. Now we have people thinking of guardrails for
Hmm.
LMs and such. So yeah, I'll have to look into that. But I think that's a good point too, though. Like tomorrow we'll wake up and there's going to be another new announcement of something new that maybe Gen AI has advanced. It's
Yeah, it's
definitely an
always that
organ.
that that interplay between people trying to hack the system and then people trying to safeguard it, and it's that back and forth. But I'm interested too, like whenever we're talking about it, I think a lot of people think Gen AI and they think chatbot, right? It's the logical use case and thing. But in our mind, it's like the chatbot is just like the tip of the snowflake that just landed on the iceberg. It goes so much
Exactly.
deeper than that. And I almost feel like this profession of the conversational designer is going to evolve past just that. Because you think of quote unquote AI agents starting to be created, and they're almost like a second coworker. Like I could
Yeah.
totally see this evolving into something bigger where they're helping design these AI agents that are acting as employees or different functions within business workflows or different types of things. But any
100%.
thoughts there of how it goes past just like your chatbot on a website or something like that?
Yeah, I have thoughts on also like the conversation design shift even further, but to
Hmm.
touch on that point, I think for the greater public, it's it's easy to attach the LLM to the chat because that's what made it visible to them or us, what however you want to define that. But yeah, like I said, we're experimenting internally where like LLMs are helping us do things that aren't necessarily helping our customers or like moving that along anyway. But
Hmm.
yeah, it goes way deeper than that. Is my stance on that. And then for the conversation design part, we're already seeing a shift in it's not even really being called maybe conversation design anymore. If you're working with LLMs, we're seeing
Hmm.
prompt engineering
Yeah.
as a name for it, right? Because rather than maybe designing out every step of the conversation, you're giving this LLM like rules and then it creates it. So I've seen prompt engineering. Brandon Ream, the CEO at VoiceFlow, which is like a conversation design tool I've used a lot here, has suggested like maybe it's called automation design. So I think that
Mm,
yeah,
yep.
we're seeing that shift in maybe even it's what am I trying to say? Structured out now. Like if you're a conversation designer, that means maybe you work with intent based bots. And then if you're an
Yeah.
automation designer, that means like you have the skill set for training LLMs and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've not heard of voice flows, just looking at them, but it reminds me of it's like this new emerging industry, which I've seen other products called AI orchestration. We had
Hmm.
Alexander on the podcast, I think probably previous to this episode, but Smith OS, what they're building, they do AI orchestration, which is that same kind of concept. It's like it's going down deeper into the workflow level, the AI agent level, and it's becoming more than just your chatbot or your user interface. And the other
Yeah.
thing that's interesting too, Benedict Evans is a great kind of view on Gen AI and where it's going. And what he equated it to was ChatGPT is like Excel from back in the day. Because when you had Excel, it was everything and it was nothing at the same time. You could do pretty much anything you wanted to, but it was such a blank canvas that you saw thousands, millions, however many SaaS products that generated off of that. And really, they were like Excel functions that were built into solutions. And he made the point, ChatGPT, is this a product or a tool, or is this a platform in a sense similar to Excel where you could do any number of things with ChatGPT, but is every prompt now going to become its own like product and things? I think we're going to see a big
Right.
evolution of solutions that are available that come out.
Yeah. That's a great comparison. I didn't even think about it like that.
So I got a couple rapid fire questions for you, unprompted. I didn't ask you about these ahead of time, but what what Gen AI, solution product are you using most right now?
Funny enough, I think it's ChatGPT. That's the first one that it's the first one that I came across, and I creature of habit. I've been
Yeah.
trying to branch out and use more, but yeah, ChatGPT.
Yeah, and just to pause on the rapid fire, the same thing. I always default to ChatGPT. When this records, this will be old news, or when this airs, it'll be old news. But like Claude just came out and they're saying, oh, it's way better than ChatGPT now. But what's even more interesting for me is when I go to Google something, I'm now like conscious of, should I Google this or should I go interact with ChatGPT? Which is really interesting because for the longest time, it was just my subconscious, right? I would just automatically, you go Google it. But now it's came out of my subconscious to making a decision. Do I go here or there? And I think that's where new habits are formed. And that's where if
Yeah,
I'm Google, and Google obviously has some great solutions they're building, but it's a change from traditional search and how we interact.
about that, and I resonated with it too because I find myself like, would like a normal Google search get me actually the answer I want, or if I ask ChatGPT this, A, would I get it like way faster than searching through a bunch of
Yeah.
articles on it, and B, would it be more what I was looking for? So yeah, I feel that
Yeah.
same way.
And then there's the reliability factor. Is it factual, which you got to back check
Right.
sometimes?
Yes. How up to date is this LLM?
Yeah. Yeah. The $1 Chevy Tahoe, right? What's your, not the most used tool, but what tool are you most excited about or you think is most interesting? Could be a brand new one or one you haven't played around with as much. Is there a tool out there that is really interesting to you?
I mentioned this is more in the world of conversation design, but I mentioned voice flow earlier, and they really seem to be on the cutting edge of combining the world of conversation design and these LLMs, Gen AI, what that all means. So I've been following what they're doing, and they have some cool stuff in the realm of my world. But I'm trying to think like personal life wise. I don't know. What about you?
Okay, so flipping it on me. That's good. So Perplexity, I've used it here and there, but I've started to look at it more, and it's like a chat GPT, but it actually pulls real sourced articles. I think that's really interesting. Similar with Voiceful, I think the AI orchestration stuff is
Mm-hmm.
really cool. On the personal side, I love like Mid-Journey, and
That was
that,
gonna be yeah.
yeah, Mid-Journey's a neat one. It's really cool. I think Sora is going to be really interesting whenever that they decide to launch that, because that's the crazy thing to me. It's every week something new launches that just has the potential to change everything, right?
Yeah.
I think like back to like conversational design too. Take something like a Sora. If I can generate a video that looks realistic, that's awesome. But if I can't go back and really like edit, fine tune, use similar characters, it's going to be tough to adopt for bigger use cases. I think the same thing with the conversational design. It's like that ability to like fine tune and edit it for your needs will be important through any of these tools that we're using.
Yeah. 100%.
Cool. I think that's all the questions I got for you. But yeah, I really appreciate you being on the podcast, Amber. Really interesting insight, just a domain that's changing a lot right now. Let me ask you this though, before we wrap. What do you think is the future of the conversational designer? Do you think it goes the way of the dinosaurs, or does it evolve? What happens to it?
Yeah, I hope not. No.
Yeah.
I don't see it going away as long as we, as conversation designers, are constantly keeping up to date, right, on these new
Mhm.
skills. And I don't think it's going to be maybe called conversation design anymore or look the same as it does now, but
Mhm.
people with these skill sets are going to still be important. And one part I touched on earlier, but didn't go into too much depth is that you still have to find a way for your chatbot to stick out and be like brand recognized and everything like that. And just plugging in an LLM and having it answer the questions, it doesn't give it that persona. It's not your brand. And I think that's where the conversation design is going to be super important going forward.
Yeah, so it almost takes it up a more strategic level in a sense.
Yeah.
That's cool. Great. Awesome having you on the Built Right podcast. Where can people find you, Amber, if they want to connect with you or check out what things you're sharing out there?
Yeah, LinkedIn would be the best spot. I
Best
post
spot?
there than Facebook, so probably
Perfect.
LinkedIn.
Great. Well, I appreciate you being on the podcast, Amber.
Thanks so much for having me. It was fun.